Imagine taking money out of your monthly food budget, literally choosing to skip meals just to afford basic sanitary pads so you don't lose your dignity or your job.
Yeah, that is a brutal reality to face.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive. We are broadcasting to you today straight from the newsroom of Addis Fortune, which is Ethiopia's largest English weekly newspaper. And, sitting in this newsroom, listening to the phones ring and watching the stories roll in, you quickly realize something.
Right. That high-level economic policy isn't just numbers on a page.
Exactly. It's real life. So today we are taking the biggest stories from this week's editions of the paper and extracting the real insights for you.
And then looking across all the reports from the newsroom this week, a very clear narrative through line emerges. I mean, it is essentially the story of the cost of transition.
The cost of transition.
Right. Ethiopia is currently undergoing this massive, tectonic shift in its economic and structural foundation. Whether we're looking at the federal budget, the physical infrastructure of the capital, or even something as intimate as the feminine hygiene market.
Yeah.
Every single story highlights the intense friction between the desire to modernize, and the harsh on-the-ground realities of supply chains, inflation, and policy execution.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I want to start with the absolute highest level, the macro picture. Finance Minister Ahmed Shide recently presented to Parliament, and the headline is a projected deficit of 277.5 billion birr in a 1.93 trillion birr budget.
Massive numbers.
Right, but I am looking at the Addis Fortune reporting on the Ministry of Revenue, and there is a glaring contradiction here. They reported a 68% increase in tax collections. They pulled in 1.1 trillion birr in just 9 months.
Yeah, that's a huge jump.
So if the government is suddenly collecting a trillion birr, why is there this massive deficit panic?
Well, it seems counterintuitive until you look at the expenditure side of the ledger. I mean, the money coming in is simply being dwarfed by the money going out.
Oh, I see.
The prime example in the data is the recent salary adjustment for public workers. The government implemented a 160 billion birr salary hike.
Oh, 160 billion just for salaries?
Exactly. They raised the minimum monthly salary from 4,760 birr to 6,000 birr just to help civil servants survive the current cost of living crisis. And that single move pushed the annual wage bill to a record 560 billion birr.
So the increased tax revenue was essentially spent before it even hit the bank accounts. It sounds like switching from borrowing from your parents with no interest to putting everything on a high-yield credit card.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, external aid fell incredibly short. I mean, the government had budgeted for $4 billion in foreign loans and grants. By the third quarter, they had barely secured $2 billion.
Oh, wow. So half of what they expected.
Right. So you have massive new domestic expenditures and a 50% shortfall in expected foreign aid. That creates the 277.5 billion birr hole.
But how does a government actually fill a hole that big? I mean, historically, didn't the Ethiopian government just borrow directly from the National Bank of Ethiopia, basically just printing money?
They did, yeah. Direct central bank borrowing is, it's the easiest way to get cash in the short term. The problem is the mechanism of inflation. Right. When you flood the economy with newly printed birr, without a corresponding increase in actual goods and services, the value of every existing birr drops. Things get wildly expensive. So, under heavy pressure from the IMF, policymakers have made a deliberate transition away from that.
Okay, so what are they doing instead?
They are trying to enforce fiscal discipline by shifting to domestic market instruments, primarily treasury bills or T-bills.
Got it. So instead of printing the money out of thin air, they are borrowing existing money from the domestic financial market.
Yes. But this is where we hit the core tension of our transition theme. That discipline, it comes at a staggering price.
Because of the interest.
Exactly. The government is essentially funding its deficit by issuing T-bills that carry interest rates between 16 and 18%.
Wow, 18%.
And because they are relying so heavily on them, domestic interest payments skyrocketed by nearly 250% in just 2 quarters. We are talking about 126.5 billion birr spent just on interest. Total public debt now sits at $51.8 billion.
Paying 126 billion birr just for the privilege of owing money? That feels like it has to break something else in the system.
It does. Abdulmanan Mohammed, who is a financial analyst quoted in the paper, issues a very stark warning about the mechanics of this strategy. Banks have a finite pool of cash to lend, right?
Right.
So the government comes to a commercial bank and offers a guaranteed risk-free 18% return on a T-bill. It makes zero mathematical sense for that bank to lend money to a local entrepreneur or a manufacturing business.
So the government's insatiable appetite for debt is actively crowding out the private sector.
Precisely. It starves local businesses of the credit they need to grow. Abdolman calls this path completely unsustainable.
And when the government sucks up all the domestic credit with 18% interest rates and foreign exchange dries up, you don't just see it on a spreadsheet, you see it on the shelves of your local pharmacy, which connects directly to the reporting on the period poverty crisis.
Yeah, it is a profound, devastating example of how macroeconomic policy dictates everyday intimate life.
The demographic numbers alone are huge here. By 2026, around 47 million Ethiopian women will be of menstrual age. But the Addis Fortune piece grounds this in very specific human stories.
Right, which makes it so much more real.
Exactly. You have Lulade Abraham, a 32-year-old accountant in Addis Ababa. She suffers from hypermenorrhea, which causes unusually heavy and prolonged periods. A pack of sanitary pads that used to cost her 60 birr is now 150 birr.
And she goes through multiple packs a cycle.
Right. 3 full packs a cycle. She's sitting at her desk at a construction firm, terrified of staining her clothes because the adhesive on the cheaper pads doesn't hold.
Yeah, the quality of the products is dropping just as fast as the price is rising because the supply chain is just collapsing.
And Lulade is someone with a stable accounting job. Out in Bahir Dar, there is 21-year-old Samra Maneye, who does what she calls the math of poverty. She uses cloth scraps herself so she can afford to buy real pads for her 16-year-old sister.
That is just heartbreaking.
And then there is Adina Abba, a university student, who literally takes the money from her 3,000 birr food allowance to buy pads. She's being forced to choose between eating and basic hygiene.
It really forces us to examine the underlying mechanisms here. Like, why has a basic hygiene product become an unaffordable luxury item?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. I read the official statements from the Ministry of Finance, and they claim that inputs for domestic manufacturing are duty-free for up to 3 years. They point to all these tax exemptions. So if the government is actively trying to help, why are local manufacturers like Lilac Sanitary Napkins operating way below their capacity and charging wholesale prices of almost 94 birr a pack?
What's fascinating here is what economists call the industrial policy trap. A policy can look fantastic on paper, but if the actual execution is strangled by contradictory taxes and a lack of foreign currency, it basically doesn't exist in reality.
Oh, okay, explain that. How is it strangled?
Well, the government did reduce some import duties on sanitary pads from 30% to 10%. However, there is still a 15% VAT applied, plus taxes on packaging. In fact, menstrual hygiene products were explicitly excluded from a recent VAT holiday designed for essential goods.
Wait, they excluded sanitary pads from a tax break meant for essentials. Didn't Kenya and Rwanda completely eliminate taxes on these items?
They did. But even if Ethiopia removed the VAT tomorrow, local manufacturers are caught in a much deeper structural trap, the foreign exchange squeeze.
The SFX shortage again?
Exactly. A local factory might have the machinery to produce 86 million pads a year, but those pads require raw pulp, specific adhesives, and absorbent polymers that must be imported. If the manufacturer cannot access US dollars from the central banking system to buy those raw materials, the machines just sit idle.
Is that why the import data in the paper looks so extreme?
Yes. The numbers paint a very clear picture of this collapse. In 2022, Ethiopia imported $10.2 million worth of finished sanitary pads. By 2024, that number crashed to just $654,000.
A drop from $10 million to $600,000. The imported products simply vanished.
And because local manufacturers couldn't access the foreign exchange to buy raw materials, they couldn't step in to fill the gap. The result is absolute scarcity, soaring prices, and young women skipping meals to afford them.
There is a researcher featured in the paper named Faiza Shamsu who's trying to bypass this entire imported supply chain.
Oh yeah, her work is incredible.
She's using NSET, which is known as the false banana, and sisal fibers to create reusable pads. They are chemical-free, they have natural antibacterial properties, and they cost 300 birr but last up to 2 years.
The engineering is brilliant because it utilizes local cellulose components for high absorbency. It completely removes the need for imported chemical polymers. But, even Faiza faces the transition problem.
Right, scaling it up.
Exactly. To move from a laboratory prototype to mass-producing disposable versions of these plant-based pads, she needs specialized industrial machinery.
Which requires foreign exchange and massive capital investment.
Precisely. The innovation is there, but the capital plumbing to support it is broken.
And that lack of capital isn't just paralyzing manufacturing. It is fundamentally stalling the physical expansion of the country. If we look at the urban population, Addis Ababa is growing by over 2% a year, sitting at around 4.2 million people. The infrastructure struggle is immense.
It really is.
Fair Eden Ekabibi just went to the city council to ask for a 9.9 billion birr supplementary budget.
And the mechanism behind that budget shortfall ties right back to our first segment. The city's coffers were drained by that exact same public worker salary adjustment.
Right, it's all connected. Meanwhile, the city is choking on a 60 billion birr debt inherited from old condominium schemes. They need 486,000 housing units a year. And there is a backlog of 1 million registered savers.
1 million people.
Yeah. These are people who have been putting money away for a decade only to be told the price of the home they saved for has fundamentally changed because construction costs just skyrocketed.
Right, and the traditional model was a state-led monopoly, where the city tried to finance and build everything itself. They've realized they simply cannot finance this through direct treasury allocations anymore.
So what's the pivot?
So they're pivoting toward public-private partnerships, or PPPs. They are asking private developers to shoulder the construction burden.
But just handing a contract to a private developer doesn't solve the underlying lack of money in the system, does it? I mean, the developer still needs to get paid.
You've hit on the exact critique raised by Merabi Fikre-Yohannes. He's a finance advisor featured in the paper. He argues that changing the builder isn't enough. The city needs deep structural reform in how capital flows.
Okay, what kind of reform?
He proposes land reform to keep building sites accessible, and crucially, the creation of a public mortgage refinancing company.
Unpack that a bit. Explain the mechanics of that. How does a refinancing company actually get homes built?
Well, think of a commercial bank like a factory that only has enough cash to build one car at a time. A buyer wants a 20-year mortgage, but banks hate giving out 20-year loans because it ties up their cash for 2 decades. They can't build the next car.
Right, they're stuck waiting for the money to trickle back.
Exactly. A public mortgage refinancing institution solves this. It steps in and buys that 20-year mortgage contract from the commercial bank immediately.
Oh, so the bank instantly gets its cash back and can immediately lend to the next home buyer.
Yes, the assembly line keeps moving. But then the question is, where does the refinancing institution get the billions of birr to buy all these mortgages?
Right, they need cash too.
So they fund it by issuing 20 to 30-year bonds. And who buys those long-term bonds? Pension funds. They are sitting on massive pools of capital that they don't need to pay out for decades.
That makes a lot of sense.
It creates a continuous mechanical cycle of liquidity, channeling institutional capital into productive housing construction, rather than relying on an empty city treasury.
It connects the pools of money that are just sitting there to the people who desperately need it. But housing isn't the only sector starving for billions in capital. Look at the telecom sector. Safaricom entered the Ethiopian market with a staggering $2.65 billion investment.
It is a massive greenfield expansion. I mean, building an entire national cellular network from scratch. And operationally, it is working.
Yeah, they are nearing their break-even point projected for 2027. They already have 10.4 million data users, and the data shows those users are consuming 1.4 times more data on average than users in Kenya.
Which is incredible growth.
But the consumers are the ones feeling the pinch of that expansion. It feels like they built a beautiful new toll road, but suddenly jacked up the toll. Safaricom recently adjusted their pricing, and their unlimited monthly data package jumped 46% in just 4 months to 2,475 birr.
That's a huge jump for consumers.
Right. And the CEO, Wim van Helput, explicitly told the paper that, quote, profit is not a dirty word, unquote. He noted they need another $5 billion to double their tower capacity to 30,000 towers. I understand infrastructure costs money, but how does jacking up prices by nearly 50% square with the national goal of digital inclusion?
It's the exact same tension we saw with the T-bills and the housing market. Modernization requires massive capital, and private capital requires a return on investment. The national regulator is demanding 99% 4G population coverage and 5G networks in 100 cities.
That's a tall order.
You physically cannot build 15,000 new cellular towers without generating profit to pay for the steel, the tech, and the labor.
I get the math, but listen to the consumers. There is an interview with an assistant brand manager named Alazar Shetu. He praises Safaricom's network quality, but he says the inconsistent rising prices are destroying his trust in the service. He is starting to treat his mobile data like a scarce resource.
Which is exactly what you don't want.
Right. He only uploads files at off-peak hours and constantly hunts for Wi-Fi. If people are afraid to use the internet because of the cost, that defeats the entire purpose of building the network.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is why relying solely on consumer data prices to fund national infrastructure is a fragile strategy. Tuel Dezamichael, a tech CEO and former Ethio Telecom employee, proposes a mechanical middle ground.
What does he suggest?
He argues Safaricom needs to aggressively pursue infrastructure sharing with the state provider, Ethio Telecom. There is no economic sense in building two separate towers on the same hill. Furthermore, they need to diversify their revenue streams into fintech, agritech, and educational technology.
So spreading the load.
Exactly. The cost of this digital transition needs to be spread across multiple commercial sectors, rather than extracting it all from the consumer's monthly phone bill.
You know, whether we are talking about managing shared telecom towers, executing billion-burr public-private housing contracts, or policing tax exemptions for local manufacturers, managing all of this private capital requires an airtight legal and regulatory system.
Oh, absolutely. The rule of law is the invisible plumbing that allows all these markets to function. If the plumbing leaks, the transition fails.
And the legal reporting in Addis Fortune this week shows a system where the pipes are bursting under the pressure. Let's look at the sheer scale of the fuel corruption trial currently happening at the Federal High Court's Lideta division.
This case is wild.
It is. Prosecutors allege that over 3.8 million liters of fuel, white diesel and benzene, were diverted from the official supply chain to unauthorized parties. It resulted in a 68.8 million birr loss to the state. You have high-level officials in the dock, including the former Director General of the Ethiopian Petroleum Supply Enterprise and a deputy director from the Petroleum Authority.
What is incredibly revealing about the reporting isn't just the crime itself, it is the friction inside the courtroom. You have a multi-million-dollar, highly complex state corruption case. But the proceedings were physically delayed because the judges had to force the prosecutors to rewrite sloppy charge sheets right there in the room.
The judge is literally correcting paperwork errors from the bench while key suspects, like a prominent businesswoman named Barakat Warku, remain at large. It's forcing the police to issue public appeals to find them. It paints a picture of a judicial system that is desperately struggling to keep pace with the scale of the commerce and the alleged corruption happening around it.
And that struggle is even more pronounced in commercial disputes, which brings us to the Cosmo trading case.
I want to dig into the mechanics of this one because it is fascinating. What started as a 20 million birr share sale way back in 2017 has completely spiraled. It has escalated all the way to the House of Federation.
For those unfamiliar, the House of Federation is the upper house of parliament that handles constitutional interpretation.
Right. And because of this single dispute, an 800 million birr, 9-story property on Bull Road in Addis Ababa is entirely frozen. Why on earth is a constitutional body dealing with a real estate and share dispute?
This raises an important question, and it's the exact aha moment when looking at emerging markets.
Yeah.
The dispute involves a businessman named Helisis Mengistu and his sons. They claim that shares were transferred to a buyer, Azeb Miratab, without proper authorization, breaching family law.
Okay.
Helisis is also trying to get the courts to recognize a 332 million birr set-off for operating costs and other liabilities. It is this tangled web of family law, corporate share transfers, and massive debt claims.
Right, but why does the Constitution get involved?
Because the commercial legal framework is too immature to handle it cleanly. When the lower commercial courts couldn't neatly unravel who was liable for what, and the legal plumbing backed up, the losing parties petitioned for a constitutional interpretation, claiming their fundamental rights were violated.
And so what did the House of Federation do?
They stepped in and froze everything. The shares, the 800 million birr building, the vehicles, it is all locked in limbo.
So a standard, albeit complex, corporate dispute gets weaponized into a constitutional crisis.
Exactly. And think about the broader economic implication. Ethiopia is actively courting first world foreign investment. They want billions for public-private partnerships and housing, and they want companies like Safaricom to pour in $2.65 billion.
Right, they need the capital.
But if foreign investors see that a standard corporate dispute over share transfers can bypass commercial judges and end up frozen indefinitely by a constitutional political body, they will view the entire market as a massive legal risk. If the courts cannot resolve complex corporate set-offs efficiently, capital will simply stop flowing into the country.
The economic engine revs up, but the legal transmission drops the gears.
That's exactly it.
So what does this all mean for you? When you step back and look at the dispatches coming out of the Addis Fortune newsroom this week, a cohesive, challenging reality emerges. Whether you are tracking how 18% T-bills are starving local businesses, or you're paying a 50% higher Safaricom bill for your data, or you're a local manufacturer struggling to find foreign exchange to make basic hygiene products, you are living through Ethiopia's grand, turbulent economic transition.
It's happening everywhere all at once.
The shift from state-led, subsidized models to hard, market-based realities is happening right now, and it is incredibly messy.
It is, and it leaves us with a critical thought to consider. As Ethiopia rapidly forces this shift toward market-based systems, relying on high-yield debt, pivoting to private developers for infrastructure, and accepting privatized, profit-driven telecom rates, will its regulatory and legal frameworks mature fast enough to handle the pressure?
That's the million-dollar question.
Or will the cost of this massive transition be paid entirely by the citizens who can least afford it?
That is the question that lingers over every budget spreadsheet, every delayed housing project, and every courtroom docket. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the pages of Addis Fortune. We will keep reading the reports. You keep staying curious. Goodbye from the newsroom.